All right, with Hashem's help, we're in Shmuel Beis, chapter 16, and we're in the middle of the section. I'm going to give a brief recap, and I think tonight we'll be picking up at Perek Ted Zayin, chapter 16, Pasuk 14, verse number 14. Okay, when we last left off, Avshalom had gathered a lot of support for himself. He sent messengers throughout all of Israel, proclaiming that Avshalom is now the king, and Avshalom is beginning to approach Yerushalayim to settle in the capital where the king resides. And David, rather than staying behind to fight, he says this is from God, and he flees Yerushalayim. He runs away, possibly even on foot, with his supporters. And everyone who sees David in exile, the exiled king, they weep at the sorry state of David and also of the Jewish monarchy, that now there's a father who's running away from his own son. Very tragic. And we saw that on David's way, he had three very significant encounters. The first was with a man named Hushai Ha'arki, which will play a big role tonight. An old friend of David's meets him, and David says, you shouldn't come with us. It's going to slow us down, or it won't be good for you. Better that you should go to Yerushalayim, and you will be my secret man on the inside, my double agent. You go profess your allegiance to my son Avshalom, but please keep an ear out for anything brewing, and let me know about it. So David's planted now several agents in Yerushalayim. He sends Hushai Arki to Jerusalem. The next meeting he had was with the man named Tziva, who you may recall, he was the servant of Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, son of Shaul. Yes, and Mephibosheth was somebody, the lame son of Saul, somebody that David, in order to show that he had no animosity towards Shaul or his household, and also in order to pay off his debt to Jonathan, to repay the oath, he said, I'll take care of you, Mephibosheth. David committed to take care of Mephibosheth. He gave him wealth, he gave him support, and everything that he needed. And here Tziva came with a slanderous report that Mephibosheth had rebelled, which was actually a lie. But perhaps it was David's exhaustion that enabled him to accept the Lashon Hara about Mephibosheth. And he said, okay, therefore, if so, Tziva, then you get all of the property of Mephibosheth. Now, there's a machloket in the Gemara, actually a very significant one, whether David actually accepted the slanderous report or he didn't. And that's going to come back later. We'll discuss. So meeting number 2 was with Tziva. And meeting number 3 was with Shimi ben Gera. This possibly was the least pleasant meeting of them all. Shimi ben Gera was a man from the tribe of Benjamin who was walking along, cursing David, throwing stones at him, and completely disgracing him and all of his people. And he called David somebody who had an ish damim, a man of blood, meaning he was associating David with all the assassinations that had occurred. You killed Saul's son, Ishbosheth. You killed Avner. It's all your fault, David. You're a horrible person. And he's spitting and cursing him. And as much as David's men insist that David retaliate and do something about it, David says, no, this is from God. And anyways, we have bigger issues to deal with. My own son is rebelling and trying to kill me. So let's leave this one alone. But as we will see, God willing, Shimi is going to come back into the story. And he's going to be taken to task. He's going to be punished for this behavior, which is essentially a rebellion in the Malchus. Okay, this was a introduction. I don't know if you're all on board. There is an interesting, another just introductory piece I'll write here, I'll insert here, is there's a famous book called the Parshat Drachim, written by the author of the Mishnah Melech, whose name escapes me at the moment. And he has a whole discourse about this phase in David's life. Was he officially considered the king at this point? When he evacuated Yerushalayim, fleeing from his son Avshalom, was he a halachic king at this point or not? That was an interesting discussion of the Parshat Drachim, which has several ramifications, including when Shimi ben Gera cursed and disgraced David, was this an offense to the king of Israel or to an individual named David. If it was just to an individual David could be mochel, he can forego his own honor and forgive Shimi. But if it was an offense to the king, a king cannot be mochel, a king cannot forego his own honor, and it would be an obligation to put Shimi ben Gera to death. That's an interesting discussion, which will come up later perhaps, and therefore I'm inserting it here. Okay, so these are the three meetings, right? He meets Hushai Haraki, who's the man on the inside now. He meets Tziva, he gifts him all the property of Mephibosheth, or he says, if what you're saying is true, I'll give it to you. And finally, he meets Shimi ben Gera, who says, well, leave him alone. He's just, it's fine. It's from God. Okay. And now, the scene shifts, or it's just about to. Verse number 14.
Which chapter?
Chapter 16 in Shmuel Beis, Pasuk Yud Daled, verse 14. Vayavo hamelech v'chol ha'am asher ito ayefim. And the king, referring to David, and all of his people arrive, and they are exhausted. Vayinafesh sham. And he rests over there in Bachurim, which was the city of Shimi. It's a Benjaminite city. The next verse says, now like the camera shifts to Jerusalem. V'Avshalom v'chol ha'am ish Yisrael ba'u Yerushalayim v'Achitofel ito. And Avshalom and the entire nation arrived in Jerusalem, and Achitofel is there too. Achitofel, you recall, is very important. He was the advisor of David, and he then changed and became the advisor of Achitofel. Okay, so now you have Avshalom and the traitorous advisor Achitofel sitting in Jerusalem, taken over. The new digs. Vahi kasher ba Hushai Arki re'ei David el Avshalom. And now who shows up? But the man that David had just parted with, his old friend Hushai. Yes, Mr. Fox, you have a hand raised?
What does it mean, every man of Israel coming to Jerusalem?
Oh, good question. V'chol ish Yisrael. Let me see if I could find anything on that. Offhand, I can't think. Let me see. I don't know. I wonder if it just means... No, I don't know. Good question.
Jerusalem is the seat of government, if you want to call it that. And obviously the Jewish people are still all over, or 10 of the 12 tribes being in Israel proper. So, yes, there's, what was it, 1,000 people were traveling with Absalom, but it says every.
Yeah, good question. Sometimes this expression could mean there's like a sampling of everybody. Like there are many there, and in that way they represent all of Israel. It could be that it refers to that, as we saw previously, that he had gotten the support of all of Israel. The rumors had spread, and nobody quite knew what was happening. It could be it was a peaceful transition of power. So Chol Ish Yisrael could mean all of the men of Israel. Might just mean, not just, but it might mean not literally physically all the people were there, but all of their support was represented because each one had, an ambassador, perhaps.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's an interesting point. I wonder about it. Okay. And now to Yerushalayim comes Hushai Arki, that man who is now the pasuk identifies as the friend of David. He now comes and approaches Avshalom, or he enters the new king's chambers. And Hushai says to Avshalom, Yechi HaMelech, Yechi HaMelech, may the king live, may the king live. He repeats it. He says it twice. And throughout this conversation, we'll see some things that could be interpreted in two ways, right? He didn't specify who the king is. He happens to be standing in front of Avshalom, who holds himself to be the king. And Hushai says, may the king live. In his mind, I wonder, he might have been referring to David. as we'll see, is indeed a supporter of David. Vayomer Avshalom el Hushai. Avshalom says to Hushai, this friend, Zechas techat recha, lama lo alachdet recha. Avshalom is one of David's sons. He knows who his father's supporters are. He says, this is how you repay the kindness to your friend David, my father. Why didn't you go with David when he left Jerusalem? Yes, Avshalom is not immediately convinced that Hushai is on his side. So Hushai explains, Lo, ki asher b'char Hashem ve'am hazeh v'chol ish Yisrael, lo ehyeh ve'ito Hashem. No, it's not true. You misunderstood. I'm not the friend of David or the supporter of David. I'm the supporter of the Malchus. Whoever Hashem chooses to be the king, him I support. The expression is that which Hashem chose and the nation chose. V'chol ish Yisrael, there's that expression again. And all the men of Israel, to him I shall be, ve'ito eshav, and with him I will dwell. So I've come to Yerushalayim because Hashem has chosen you to be the king. Right? He's answering Avshalom's suspicion by saying, I support the position, not the person. There is a fascinating, I don't know what you call it, a double entendre. The word he says is, to him I shall be, lo ehyeh. Like I give my allegiance to him, to the new, whoever Hashem appointed, referring to Avshalom, which is spelled Lamed Vav. The way that it's written in the actual scroll of the Megillah is Lamed Aleph, which means lo, I will not be. Lo, I will not be to the one who has been appointed. So this is a fascinating instance where the Kri Ksiv, the way that it's written versus the ways that it's stated, could actually be representing what Hushai Arki was thinking. Again, he's speaking in like a double language. He's saying, I will be to you, but the same words, the same sounds at least, can mean I am not accepting you. Yeah. A fascinating thing. Okay. Vashenit, lemian yevot. And secondly, says Hushai, a second reason why I'm here to support you is, who shall I serve? His son, no? I should only serve his son. Kasher avarti lifnei avicha ken elefanecha. It's not like you have nothing to do with David, who is my dear friend and I supported in the past. You're his son, so I view you as the natural successor of David, and I'm supporting you. Right? So Hushai is playing it extremely innocently. I'm supporting the position, and I'm supporting you. Avshalom says to Achito, okay, and that's the end of that. And as we'll see, Avshalom accepted this, and he counted Hushai Ha'arki as one of his supporters now, because we're going to see that's going to be a critical piece, because Hushai is going to be the double agent who's going to shift the gears here. Vayomer Avshalom el Achitofel. Okay, there's a slight gap in the text, probably indicating a passage of time or like a new scene. Vayomer Avshalom el Achitofel. Avshalom says to Achitofel, Havu lachem etza, mana aseh. Nu, come up with an idea for yourselves. What shall we do? In other words, Avshalom is saying, okay, we've entered Yerushalayim. We have a lot of support. How do I solidify my rulership? I want to prove that I'm the king, and I want to show everybody that I'm the king. Now, he should have said, give me advice. The expression that he uses is, the English doesn't capture it. Mine says, give counsel. What should we do? But havu lachem etzah means give a counsel for yourself, meaning for your own sakes. For your own sake, give me advice. Instead of saying, give me advice, like let's give everybody advice. It's hard for me in English to express it. Do you understand the idea here? The verse is not referring, it's as if Avshalom is saying, the advice you give me is also going to benefit you. And the idea is that anybody who's supporting Avshalom at this moment is playing with high voltage. Because sure, right now he is in the lead, and he's in Yerushalayim, and he's on the throne. But if things sour, if Avshalom is not successful in solidifying his rulership, and David comes back into power, then everybody who supported Avshalom is in danger. Yeah, because they were mored b'malchus, they rebelled against the king. It's treason. So Avshalom says, I need to solidify my kingship, and don't just think you're giving advice for my benefit. It's going to benefit you as well, because you're my supporters, and we're all in trouble, right? If this ship goes down, we're all doomed. So give us some advice, he says. So Achitofel says, okay. And he comes up with the following piece of advice, which is absolutely atrocious, vicious, vile. Says Achitofel to Avshalom, Bo el pilakshe avicha. You know what you should do? If you want to establish that you're the king now, you should come to your king's concubines. You should lay together, you sleep with your king's concubines. Asher niach lishmor abayit. You know those 10 concubines he left to keep the house. You remember when David fled, he left 10 wives behind, or not full-blown wives, but concubines. Those 10 wives, you should be with them. V'shama kol Yisrael ki divasht et avicha v'chasku yedei kol asher itach. Then if you do that and everybody finds out that you laid with the king's concubines, that's going to show that you've completely separated from David, and everyone's going to say, okay, it's Avshalom and not David. In other words, with this gross piece of advice, what Achitophel is doing is he's telling Avshalom, the son of David, you must separate yourself from your father. You have to disassociate. As long as you're still connected to your father and people view you as his son and not like a new thing, it's too murky. People are going to support David. They're going to shift back to him just as easily as they shifted to you. You have to create a clear divide between Avshalom and David. And that way, anybody who supports you from here and forward is going to be not supporting David. At this point, anybody who supports Avshalom is just saying, oh, maybe because he's David's son. It's like, I support David, I support Avshalom. And they'll easily shift back to supporting David. So very wisely, it's a key in advice you have to make a cut here, make a clear cut, and lay with his concubines, showing that this is a complete offense to David, and it also solidifies the fact that you're the king. A quick point here, concubines we've discussed in the past, according to many of the Rishonim, there's no halachic marriage. There's no kiddushin. He doesn't acquire her in the legal way. There's no kisuva. There's no formal process of creating a concubine. It's just a woman who is designated to be with the king. Also, it's probably only a right that's reserved for a king. A normal citizen cannot do this. And therefore, Avshalom being with the concubines, while it is a gross thing, it's not necessarily a violation of the halacha. It's not committing adultery because they're not actually the wives of David. They're just the concubines. It is a relationship that no longer exists in our days, and I wouldn't recommend it either.
It goes back to Avraham, doesn't it?
What'd you say?
It goes back to Avraham Avinu.
Very good. Yes, Abraham did have a pilegesh. Yes, he took in like Hagar, not as a full-blown wife, but just to produce children. Yeah, very good. It could be once the Torah was given, it became something that was reserved for the king. That's an interesting discussion. I think it came up in Shoftim when we learned it. There is the opinion of the Rambam, who learns that a pilegesh does have kiddushin, that there is a formal kiddushin which creates a halachic bond between the husband and wife and forbids her to everybody else on the planet. If that's so, you really have to wonder here how Avshalom would do this and basically commit adultery in public. As we're about to see, it's going to be a very public affair. It's going to be very public, and it will be a public violation of halacha, which is not a wise way to establish your kingship, because the king should be a holy person, right? Like, we view Avshalom as a wicked person, but at this point, people thought he was righteous, right? We've even learned that he was a Nazir, right? He was a holy person, and it would be strange to violate halacha this way. So I don't know what to do with the Rambam's approach that a pilegesh is actually a legal wife. Okay, in other words, Avshalom is saying Avshalom is being told by Achitophel, you have to separate yourself from David, sleep with the concubines. Okay, so this is what they do in verse number 22. Vayatul Avshalom ha'ohel al hagag. So they pitched a tent. They made a huge tent, like when they have like a parade or something, and they set up a tent. They set up a tent for Avshalom on top of the roof, where everybody could peer up. Vayavo Avshalom el pilakshe aviv. So it was almost like a presentation. That the concubine would come, Avshalom and her would go into seclusion in that tent. So everybody could see the king and the ex-king's concubine entering the room, and they all know what's happening in there. And one after the next, all 10 of them, le'einei kol Yisrael, to the eyes of all of Israel, meaning it was extremely public, Avshalom laid with his father's concubines. Right? Absolutely gross, but also keen a very shrewd, clever way to establish his authority. There is something fascinating here. It says that they pitched the tent on the roof. It doesn't just say on a roof, it says the roof. And I'll leave it to you, perhaps, as a pop quiz. Where else have we seen a roof in this whole ordeal? That might be a significant roof that we're referring to.
And David and Bathsheba.
Excellent. Yes, that's exactly it. David wakes up from his nap. He goes onto the roof. And from that roof, he peers down and he sees Bathsheba bathing. And that's what started this whole thing. And that is the roof where this was happening.
Oh.
Right, a full circle, a fascinating divine thing, that the very roof where the tent was pitched, where Avshalom committed this heinous thing to separate himself from David and violate their concubines, there was the same roof where David had sinned. Yes,
Wait a
Mrs.
minute,
Fox.
I get the picture that this is kind of like a mountain there, and David's palace is on top of this hill or small mountain or something,
Yeah.
and Bathsheba's
House.
was below there, so he could easily see her. And I don't know how many other houses were around.
A lot. We were there.
It's Jerusalem. Yeah, Jerusalem is a packed city. Is a packed city.
Mhm.
I don't think it was like a castle on a hill, like isolated from the rest of the neighborhood. Like Jerusalem is an elevated city. It is higher up. However, the houses were close together. They're like David was able to see onto Bathsheba's roof. It wasn't an unusual thing to have other roofs in the area. And here it was like basically on the roof, which was the royal roof, which is the very one that David stood up upon to initiate this whole sequence of events. This is the very roof that now his concubines are being violated on.
And that roof is higher than all the other roofs that are around.
I don't know. Perhaps it is because it would be like the honor of the king to make the roof higher. Like there's a halacha you shouldn't build. There's a law that you shouldn't build other buildings higher than the synagogue in the town. You know, if the Jews are in control of the city planning, there's such a rule.
But was there a synagogue at that time? Did everybody a house of worship called a synagogue?
Well, yeah, you had the
Or a
the
shul?
Mishkan. You had the Mishkan. Yeah.
Shul-
I don't know
shul, like,
I don't know what the shul life was like over there. It's a good question.
Or a Yiddish
I
word,
do-
and
Whether it was the highest or just high, the point is that a lot of people could see it.
The
synagogue
city in his time was much lower than it is now. What the modern city is very far north and west of where the city was in his time. If you know a map of the old city, the Yerushalayim, what they call now today Ir David, city of David, is south of the old city.
Yes.
And there's a ridge that goes up, and supposedly the evidence is, I have not really done all the research, but the evidence is that his palace was fairly high up on that ridge, but not necessarily the highest thing, but it was high up.
Thank you. I want to share something very significant. This here is chapter 12, a few chapters back, when Nathan the prophet comes to David after he sins with Bathsheba, and he gives him the whole allegory of the man who had the sheep, right? The poor man, the rich man, and he gets taken advantage of. So Nathan says, yeah, you're the man, you're going to be punished. And now, here he goes, verse number 10. And now I just want to remind you of these faithful words, which are now coming to fruition. The sword shall never depart from your household forever, because you have despised me, and you have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. So says Hashem, behold, I will raise up against you evil out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and I will give them to your friend, and he will lie with your wives in the sight of this son. It's referring exactly to this episode. Avshalom, his friend, so to speak. Re'echa, meaning your fellow, your son will lie with your wives in the sight of this son.
Mm.
Yeah. So that that prophecy is being fulfilled now, the punishment of David. And David is he's not fooling himself. He knows exactly why all these things are happening, as we saw last chapter when he was getting cursed and by Shimei. He was saying, this is from God. This is all the punishment. I understand this is all the consequences of my actions. He's taking full responsibility for all that's happening. And it's just amazing to see how so clearly here this was occurring. And you can imagine the news traveled back to David. Okay, let's go a little further here. Okay, the end of the closing verse of chapter 16. Va'atzat Achitofel asher ya'atz b'yamim mehem ka'asher yishal ish bidvar ha'elohim ken kol atzat Achitofel gam LaDavid gam LaAvshalom. A very significant verse. The counsel of Achitofel that he advised in those days was as if someone would inquire of the word of God. Such was all the counsel of Achitofel, both to David and to Avshalom. In other words, the question is, how in the world could Avshalom agree to do such a thing? Like, this is very extreme, to sleep with the concubines in public. It's just the lack of tznius, kedusha, and it's your father's. That's wild stuff. The answer is, the person who gave this counsel was Achitophel. And Achitophel has an amazing record. In the days of David, he would consult with Achitophel. Like, for example, the Gemara says, should I go to war, Achitophel? And Achitophel would give his advice. And then they would ask the Urim V'Turim. They would ask God through the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. And the Urim V'Turim would support Achitophel's advice. So time and again, people had seen that Achitophel, the wise counselor of David, he impeccable advice. Always hits it on the nose. So in this case, even though it sounds strange, lay with the concubines on the roof, do it. Why? Because it's coming from Achitophel. That's why the prophet is stressing here the gravity with which this advice came. It came from Achitophel. It wasn't just a random advisor of the king. It was the advisor who has this amazing track record. Now, unfortunately, he's soured, and we're going to see there's going to be a bitter end to Achitophel. But this verse is coming to explain that. How could people accept the advice? Let's go a little further. We have some time. Chapter 17 now we're beginning. There's one point I want to say over here. It's a technical point. It's just interesting, so I'll note it because it's come now. There is a word in this verse which we read, but it's not written at all. The word ish. In English, it's as if a man would inquire of the word of God. The word man is not written in the verse. It's just read. We have a tradition to read it. Interesting. Like, how could you have a word that we read that's not in the verse? So the Radak here says a very, I guess, rationalistic answer. He says, oh, excuse me. In this case, actually, he doesn't say. He says it in a prior case, but he says the way these things came to be is people had different versions of the book, and we kind of combined them. And some books had it, and some books didn't, and they chose one way to write it, and we read it according to the other way. It's like a very unsatisfying answer. Actually, over here, he says something else.
Called a telephone tree.
Yeah, but now it's scary to say that about prophets, and by the Torah we don't say such a thing, right? The Torah is one consistent tradition. I just wanted to point that out. It's a bit of a controversial Radak, but it's a chapter prior. Okay, just put it in your pocket. We're not going to go into that right now. Fine. Forging forth, just a little further. Chapter 17. Vayomer Achitophel el Avshalom. Achitophel, the advisor, says to Avshalom, the king, Evcharana shnemasar elef ish, right? The next piece of the plan. Let's take 12,000 men, va'akuma ve'erdefa acharei David halayla, and tonight I will get up and chase after David. Va'avo alav v'hu yagia urfei yadayim. I'll arrive by David. He'll be exhausted and weak because he's in the middle of fleeing. He has no provisions. I'll frighten him. Everyone's going to flee. And then I'll strike down David. And I shall strike down David because all of his men will run away. Then I'll return all of David's supporters to Jerusalem. And then as everybody returns, then all the nation will be in peace. So Avshalom, Achitophel gives this amazing advice. He says to his king, we have to act fast. Tonight, let's take 12,000 people, which represents the 12 tribes of Israel, like 1,000 from each tribe. Now, they didn't actually get 1,000 from each tribe. That would take too long, and we need to act tonight. So let's take 12,000, a number which represents each tribe, showing that there's like national unity. Let's chase after David. While he's exhausted, we have to act fast before he has time to get his bearings. I'll kill him, and I'll bring his supporters to you, and they will turn into your loyalists, and that will really solidify your kingship, right? So Achitophel is guiding Avshalom here, one piece after the next. First, sleep with the concubines. It shows that you've divided yourself from David. Now, finish him. Go in with 12,000 men, kill David, bring back his supporters and turn them into your own supporters. And then Shalom al Yisrael, that everyone will be united under you, and that will be it. So what's Avshalom's reaction? It says here, Vayishar hadavar b'nei Avshalom. The matter was right in the eyes of Avshalom, v'nei kol ziknei Israel, and all of the elders of Israel. Unfortunately here, the zikanim, which usually means the wise sages of Israel, here it just means the people who had surrounded Avshalom who had actually committed treason by abandoning David. Okay. But very interestingly, Avshalom doesn't immediately follow the advice of Achitophel this time. He says, Vayomer Avshalom, verse number 5, Kra na gam lechushai ha'arki. Please also call Chushai ha'arki, this guy that came to support me, David's friend. Let's hear what he has to say. Which is so interesting. Well, Achitophel, we just established, was a great advisor with an impeccable track record. And he's saying good. He's making a very good plan. Why would Avshalom, in this case, suddenly want to call for a second opinion? Let's get a second opinion. Let's ask what Hushai thinks. And indeed, in verse number 6, Hushai comes to Avshalom, Vayomer Avshalom elav, Kadavar hazeh diber Achitophel. This is what Achitophel said. Should we listen to him? Imayin atah deber. And if you think not, please let me know what you have to say. Perhaps the reason that Avshalom was asking for a second opinion is part of the plan was, I'm quoting Mefarshim, part of the plan was to kill David. According to the Abarbanel, at least, Avshalom never had in mind to kill his father. He wanted to take over the throne. He was willing to do some pretty heinous things, but to actually murder his father, that he never intended to do. And, as evil as he was, that's next level, to kill your father, the righteous David, right? He was a spiritual person, Avshalom. He was a Nazir. He had spent his life, doing the service of God. So he realized that committing murder, and not just anybody, but the anointed one of Hashem, that's an intense thing, and it's your own father. So it could be that that's what made him a little bit uneasy with Achitophel's advice, and he called in for a second opinion. Hushai responds, and here's his opportunity, right? The double agent is now given the microphone. And we know he's on David's side. So Hushai says to Avshalom, Lo tova etzah asher yatz Achitophel b'pam hazeh. This time, Achitophel's advice is no good. Like until now, he's been all right. Hushai had to stay silent. When the concubine incident occurred, Hushai couldn't expose himself as a supporter of David. But now he's saying, this time I disagree. You know that your father, says Hushai, you know that your father and his people, they're giborim hema, umarei nefesh hema, and they're bitter-spirited, kedov shakul basadeh, like a bereaved bear in the field. Yeah, if you just walk between the invisible line of a bear and her offspring, she'll go crazy. And certainly a bereaved bear, he just lost his kids, that bear is going to go do anything. So you have like a cornered animal, basically. That's what David will be. David is a man of war. You think you're going to find him like exhausted and sleeping? They're not going to rest tonight. This is way too few people, insufficient troops to go attack your father. He's surely hiding in one of the openings or in one of these places. והיה כנפול בהם בתחילה ושמע שומע ואמר הייתה מגיפה בעם אחרי אבשלום. If you attack him tonight, people are going to be reporting that a plague has befallen your supporters, Avshalom. Like, this is not a good plan. I disagree. Who got, you know, David's strong and he's going to fight. Vehu, and he goes on, and this is verse number 10. Vehu gam ben chayil, he is a man of valor. Asher libo kilev ha'aryeh. His heart is like the heart of a lion. He mace yimas. It will certainly melt. Everybody knows that they're men of valor. I don't know what it will surely melt mean. They're referring to David's heart will melt. What does the Radak say there?
It's
In number 10. Number 10, he says his heart is like a lion's heart and it will melt. I thought melting was like a sign of weakness. It sounds like he's saying the melting is a strong thing. I'm just not familiar with it. I didn't see that earlier. Okay. In any event, I think we'll pause here at a cliffhanger because we have a minion coming up. But Hushai contradicts the advice of Achitophel, and he says this is dangerous because there are too few people to fight David. He's going to be like a cornered animal. In fact, I'll just finish with this. There's a halacha that when the Jews go to war, they have to leave one side for their enemy to flee. Now, this on the one hand can be perceived as a sign of mercy, like you're letting the enemy off. If you want to fight, you can run away. But the Rambam, and the Ramban also writes that it's actually a strategic thing. If you surround your enemy on all sides, he'll be more dangerous. Because when you realize that it's do or die, if I don't succeed, I will die, you'll fight even harder. So your father David, you're going to make him a cornered animal. He's going to fight way harder. Don't do it this way. You have to do it a different way, which we're going to see next week, God willing. We'll continue from chapter 17. All right.
a
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Have a great night.
Good night.
Good night.
Right.
Bye-bye.